G'day everyone, continuing my top 20 album series. We're up to number 13 now, and I'm going to have to be careful with this one not to talk too much because I have had a bit of an obsession with this band. Fans of prog rock, I know again a divisive genre of music, this one. You'll like this one. It is the classic Canadian power trio Rush and their 1981 album Moving Pictures. A real phenomenon, Rush, so big in the Northern Hemisphere, the States, the UK, right through the northern half of the world, but virtually, I wouldn't say unheard of, but never really played on Australian radio or never saw any of their clips really on TV. So many people in Australia don't know of this band, but they were around for well over 40 years. Only really retired about probably 5 years ago. Very sadly, drummer Neil Peart, who arguably, certainly in the top handful of drummers the world's ever seen, he passed away quite recently. Geddy Lee, bass player, keyboards, and Alex Lifeson, the guitarist, are the other two members of this band. They are all dead set musical virtuosos, incredible on their respective instruments. Geddy Lee on bass. You've just got to see some concert footage, and there's a heap of it of Rush on YouTube if you're interested in checking them out. It's funny how I got into this band. Like a lot of people, probably the only song of theirs I'd ever heard was Tom Sawyer, which is off this album. And I'd never really been interested in checking him out. And then I was watching Family Guy, sort of one of my favourite cartoons, and there's this scene where a completely stoned Chester, the Cheetos mascot, is snorting crushed up Cheetos like they're cocaine, and you can hear Tom Sawyer in the background, and he stands up and yells Neil Peart's the greatest effing drummer who ever lived. And that, for some reason, inspired me to check out their stuff. And when I did, wow, did I get into them in a big way. And that left a lot of territory to cover because this is a band that produced, I lost count in the end, I think well over 20 studio albums. This is about their, if I just do a quick count, I think this is their, probably sixth or seventh. And this is what the definition of prog rock is really sort of ill-fitting for them at this stage, because they'd really sort of entered the realms of commercial rock music, had given away, like their truly prog stuff like Hemispheres. There's a song on that which spans an entire side, 20 odd minutes. 2112 is a famous record of theirs. Again, a bit of an odyssey. This was far more conventional with, still not that many songs, actually, only 8 songs. But Tom Sawyer, their biggest commercial hit, that's sort of standard length. This album is so good because it shows off their chops. I think the songs are very accessible and listenable. Peart wrote great lyrics, really interesting lyrics. The second track off this album, Red Bar Cheddar, which is a great driving track if you're driving a car. It's actually about someone driving a car in a time in the future when they're banned. But it's got that great sort of thumping rhythm section. And this is Geddy Lee's bass that really rumbles like a finely tuned engine. One of my favourite songs on this is one that doesn't necessarily get talked about. It's called The Camera Eye. That is a long song, goes for I think 8 or 9 minutes. Again, a great sort of rumbling bass line underneath the whole thing. YYZ, as it's called, another well-known instrumental of theirs, demonstrates just how good a musos they are. Limelight was another big hit off this album, and a terrific song about the trappings of fame, written by Peart, or lyrics written by Peart, music written by Lee and Lifeson. Peart was a famously private person, and this sort of articulated the dilemma he found himself in. If you're interested enough to check Rush out, I wouldn't just listen to one album and say, okay, well, that's not my cup of tea, because they really did encompass so many different styles. In the mid-'80s, like everyone, they were using a lot of synthesizers, probably too much. They did a bit of a grungy album in the early 90s. They were still pumping out albums as late as 2012, and some great albums too. And their concert stuff is incredible. Most of it is on YouTube, so check it out. Personally, my favourite's one from 1981, the year this album came out, called Exit Stage Left, and I think it's them in Toronto, but musically, it shows them at their absolute peak. So from a commercial perspective, if I was recommending Rush to anyone, this is the album I would get them to start with. But a terrific album. I love Tom Sawyer. I think the sentiments of that are brilliant, and it's a really musically interesting track. And so many of the other tracks on this album are the same. A lot of people have issues with Geddy Lee's vocals. Yes, they are very high pitched. I'm not one of them. It doesn't faze me overly, but even if you do, musically, I think it's pretty hard to dispute. Even people that don't like them would acknowledge that as far as musicians go, these guys are pretty hard to beat. Well worth checking out, and if you do like this album, let me tell you, you're in for a very interesting musical ride, because there's a heap of material to familiarise yourself with. But that is my number 13, Moving Pictures by Rush. We'll be back shortly with number 12.